Near the center of Houston, Chicago, the 28-year-old nurse, Stacy Thompson, managed her days with the combination of fortitude and compassion. Her life was intricately entwined with her high school boyfriend Stephan, serving as a monument to unwavering love and shared aspirations. The 30-year-old accountant, Stephan, and his partner had developed a strong bond during their high school years at a nearby Houston high school. Their story was one of an instant connection and a well-known example of a couple who never drifted apart. Remembering how you used to yell my name so loudly that everyone else seemed to fade away was something Stacy would often think back on. Their first meeting was at a school basketball game, and Stephan was there to cheer her on from the stands. Sitting in their comfortable living room with the most of their shared history all around them, Stacy laughed. With a smile, Stephan took her hand and said, "How could I forget that I'd know you'd be my forever?" As they got closer over the years, their goals also rose, and their conversations frequently dipped into these repositories of memories. While Stephan found his calling in numbers and worked his way up in a local finance firm, Stacy followed her passion for helping people and became a nurse. Their evenings were filled with shared dreams of a future family disc, talking about how they would raise their children with love and laughter in a happy home. "What I want most is to dream of us watching our kids play in the backyard." Stacy would explain that her eyes were filled with the vision of the ideal future. Unaware of the difficulties that lay ahead, years passed with attempts to conceive and every negative test awaiting their ideal dream. It was a silent struggle that they endured together until a visit to a specialist revealed that Stephan had fertility issues. Stephan was always supportive and shared her vision. Together, they set out on the journey to parenthood. They turned to artificial insemination as a beacon of hope in their quest for a family. The procedure was a testament to their resilience, choosing to face the medical challenges with optimism. "This could be it. It's okay," Stacy reassured him as they processed the news. "We'll figure this out together," determined Stacy, while they waited for the insemination to take place in the sterile clinic room. Stephan squeezed her hand. Stacy ever in the clinic, their conversation was a mixture of hopeful whispers and laughter, a counterbalance to the clinical coldness surrounding them. As they left the clinic that day, walking under the vast Chicago sky, their conversation turned to the future, filled with hope and anticipation. "Let's just keep believing," the optimist smiled back. "Whatever happens, we have each other, and that's more than enough." As they strolled together, Stacy remarked, "The setting sun," as evening descended upon Houston. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, and the city's skyline was illuminated by a mosaic of lights that produced a comforting warmth. Stacy and Stephan, tired but happy after their day at the clinic, found comfort through their home's windows. Nestled together on the couch, Stacy rested her head on Stephan's shoulder and their hands intertwined. "You know," Stacy started softly, her voice a reflective whisper from those high school hallways. "To now, it's been quite the journey with you," he replied, smiling, his eyes mirroring the affection in hers. They spent hours just like that, reminiscing about their prom night mishaps, our first trip together to the coast, and the numerous quiet evenings like this one, filled with dreams and gentle laughter. When the daily routine returned the following morning, Stacy went back to the hospital. Her steps were a little more cautious, and her mind was preoccupied with the possibility of a new life beginning inside of her. She approached her nursing duties with a gentle touch, which further increased her empathy for her patients. Back at his workplace, Stephan found himself preoccupied, his mind constantly wandering to Stacy. Throughout the day, he texted her, each one a modest gesture of his concern, asking her how she was feeling and reminding her to take it easy. One of the texts made Stacy smile during a hectic shift. Weeks went by in a similar pattern, with each day being a mixture of routine and subdued anticipation. However, Stacy soon noticed changes, subtle at first, then obvious as a persistent nausea took hold. As time went on, her suspicions grew that this might be the case. And one morning, she found herself shaking and her heart racing. When Stacy finally glanced at the positive result, it was evident that she was pregnant. The day of the insemination had been filled with intense emotion. Stacy had taken a pregnancy test at home. The minutes she waited for, the results were like our own. Stacy sat there in ecstatic disbelief until reality set in. Today was the day she would tell Stephan about the miraculous development. She had meticulously planned a small celebration for the two of them at home. That evening, when Stephan arrived home exhausted from the day's work, he was greeted not by the usual quiet of their living room, but rather by Stacy, her eyes sparkling with unshed tears of joy. "Stephan, we did it," she whispered, handing him the positive pregnancy test. For a moment, Stephan stood frozen, then joy, pure and radiant, spread across his face. He wrapped Stacy in a tight embrace, laughing afterward, and asked in a tearful voice, "Are we really going to be parents?" The challenges of the past fading into a bright, promising future as they lay in darkness. The quiet buzz of their shared dream filled the space around them. A dream that was slowly and beautifully becoming a reality. The morning after their joyful discovery, Stacy nodded, her own laughter bubbling up. "Yes. But I thought we could go to the doctor tomorrow, just to be sure, to confirm it officially." Stephan immediately agreed, his practical nature tempering their joy with the need for certainty. "Let's do that." With a quiet enthusiasm, Stephan got out of bed, early to prepare Stacy a surprise breakfast in bed. He carefully put her favorite breakfast: crimped eggs, fresh strawberries, and a warm croissant with a cup of decaffeinated coffee in a tray, and took extra care to make everything perfect when he returned. His heart was still bursting with happiness from the life-changing news. Stacy had just woken up and was gently stretching under the covers when Stephan entered the tray with his hands, broadcasting his intentions of love. Her eyes brightened up with excitement. "What's this all about?" she asked, her smile genuine and wide. "Just a little bit to get our big day started, right?" After breakfast, they got ready and headed to the clinic. The drive there was emotional and reflective as they revisited the challenges they had surmounted to arrive at this hopeful point. Stephan responded by placing the tray across her lap and giving her a gentle kiss on the forehead. They ate together, talking about names for the baby, their hopes for the future, and how they imagined their lives as parents. In the waiting room, a few couples and single women were having conversations about their experiences and stories. Stephan reached over to squeeze Stacy's hand and met her eyes, silently promising that no matter what happened, they would be in this together. His voice was filled with emotion. Upon arriving at the clinic, they found themselves among a small group of expectant mothers, each at a different stage of life, but united by the common thread of potential motherhood. Stacy and Stephan sat quietly, taking in the conversation around them. Every now and then, Stacy overheard one such conversation in which a young woman, seated alone herself, told a nearby couple about her recent breakup. Her voice was resilient yet sorrowful as she stated, "He wasn't ready to be a father, so it looks like I'm doing this on my own." The woman's remarks made Stacy's heart tighten, and she instantly turned to face Stephan. His steady support seemed like a light in that moment. Moved by the talk and their hands intertwined, Stephan reached out, took her hand in his, and said, "I'm here, Stacy, no matter what." He felt her gaze turn to look at her and read the gratitude in her eyes. When Stacy realized that Stephan was prepared to tackle both the joys and the challenges of parenthood with her, it strengthened her appreciation for him and strengthened their bond. As they waited for their turn to see the doctor, when their names were finally called, they rose as a united front, prepared to face whatever news awaited them. This realization gave Stacy a surge of gratitude for her partnership with Stephan. Stacy and Stephan were waiting for the pregnancy test results at the clinic, and the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. They had their hands clutched tightly, their hearts full of hope, and every minute seemed to go by faster. The ticking of the clock felt like a drumbeat in their anxious little world. Hearts at last, the physician reappeared with a grin that was expressive enough to convey her congratulations even before she finished speaking. Stacy Stephan declared, "The test results are positive. You will become parents." The worry that had clouded their morning vanished instantly, and was replaced by a radiant, overwhelming happiness. Stacy's breath caught in her throat, and tears of joy welled up in her eyes as she turned to Stephan, who was already beaming. They embraced tightly, their hearts swelling with the promise of the new life they would soon welcome. Stacy and Stephan went to the clinic for their first ultrasound a few weeks later, still writing about the excitement of their confirmed pregnancy. As the ultrasound technician set up the equipment, they clasped hands, their fingers intertwined with nervous excitement. The cool gel spread over Stacy's belly, and the wand glided across the screen, flickering to life and revealing not one, not two, but 3 distinct heartbeats, here having triplets. According to the technician, Stacy and Stephan were hit with the news like a bolt from the blue. Triplets, with her voice mixed with caution and congratulations. The screen showed 3 small lives, each with a beating heart. Their excitement was evident, but it was soon subdued by a wave of realistic worries. There was a brief drumroll that reverberated throughout the space. 3 babies meant 3 times as much work, 3 times as much care, and 3 times as much love. The drive home was full of lively chatter, interspersed with moments of reflective quiet. Stacy said, "Stephan, can you believe it? Still in shock, but we'll succeed. We've done this before, Stacy. We'll do this too," Stephan answered, his voice steady, but his thoughts racing with the logistics of suddenly growing their family so large. The nursery, which was originally intended to hold 1 child, was expanded to hold 3 as Stacy's belly grew over the weeks. Each evening, Stephan would read aloud stories to Stacy while placing his hand on her stomach and feeling the soft kicks of their unborn children. These moments became their sanctuary, a time of connection not only with each other, but also with the tiny beings they were eager to meet. As the due date drew near, a mixture of excitement and the normal fears of upcoming parenthood intensified by 3, as the saying goes, even the best laid plans frequently go awry. Stacy and Stephan painstakingly attended natal classes, studied up on triplets, and adjusted their lives for the monumental upheaval that was approaching. During one of their routine prenatal visits, Stacy and Stephan discussed the logistics of delivery with the doctor. Due to the complexities associated with the triplet pregnancy, the doctor recommended scheduling a cesarean section to minimize risks for both Stacy and the babies. Stacy, engrossed in her dreams and preparations, remained blissfully unaware of the challenges that would soon test the strength of their bond and their readiness for the unexpected. They knew their lives were about to change forever, but what lay ahead was beyond anything they could have imagined. The doctor gave her advice in a reassuring but strong tone, outlining the reasons, taking note of the infant's positions and the possibility of preterm labor, which was typical in multiple births. After a quick consultation, Stephan grasped Stacy's hand and softly squeezed it as they both nodded in agreement. The doctor then suggested possible dates by looking through Stacy's schedule to find a convenient time. A date was scheduled for just 3 weeks away. It was close enough to feel genuine, yet far enough away to cause a range of feelings in the soon-to-be. The nursery, which had been a project of anticipation, was now ready and waiting, a cozy haven in pastel colors, with 3 small cribs lined side by side. Stacy and Stephan stood at the doorway looking in, seeming to echo back their mixed feelings of excitement and nervousness. To be parents, as they left the clinic, the weight of the scheduled date hung between them, a tangible reminder of the rapidly approaching change to their lives. The drive home was quieter than usual, each lost in their own thoughts, mentally preparing for what was to come. The ensuing days were a haze of preparation and action. Stacy, who was becoming more physically exhausted but emotionally resilient, rested for long hours, frequently feeling the comforting kicks of their babies every night as they lay in bed. The couple would talk about their hopes and fears. And almost at the end, Leo would say, with a hint of apprehension in her voice, Stephan carefully checked and rechecked their hospital bags, making sure everything Stacy and the babies might need was packed and ready. The optimist comforted Stacy, saying, "We're ready, everything will be okay." But even with his words of comfort, the impending cesarean surgery date increased her anxiety. As the morning broke clean and bright, it was a sharp contrast to the turbulence of emotions churning in Stephan and Stacy's hearts. It was a mixture of fear of the unknown and the natural nervousness of first-time parents, confronting the monumental job of introducing not one, but 3 new beings into their world. When they drove to the hospital, the early morning light seemed to bless their new beginning, filling the car with a warm glow. When they arrived, the atmosphere was charged with a mixture of nervous anticipation and excitement. Today was the day they would meet their triplets, the day their lives would change forever. While the medical staff worked feverishly to get Stacy ready for the cesarean section, she experienced a strange sense of peace. With his mind racing with images of their impending reunion, Stephan stood by her side, wearing a sterile mask and robe, his hand a steady presence in hers, and his heart crimson with every beat. To be enlarged family, the room was filled with the clinical precision. As the doctors started the surgery, a victim of anesthetic, Stacy felt dissociated, her thoughts cloudy. But she was also fully aware of how serious the situation was. As the moment they had been waiting for arrived, their newborn's first cries peeked through the antiseptic space as Stephan squeezed her hand in an attempt to anchor her with his presence. The relief of the operating room calm enveloped Stephan for a minute, until the doctor lifted the baby and he saw the room descend into a dense, startled silence that made it impossible to discern the infant's dark skin. Stephan stood still, his mind struggling to make sense of what he was seeing and the world he had imagined. His countenance was confused, joy giving way to astonishment, and finally to a deep confusion. Stacy, dazed and confused, felt the environment change but was unable to see well. "Stephan, what's not right?" Her voice was feeble, laced with fear. Stephan was unable to reply. His mind was racing, trying to figure out how it was that both Stacy and he had white skin. Sensing the tension in the room, the doctor quickly wrapped the baby and gave him to the nursing staff before moving on to the next step of the procedure. The lineage was undisputed and clear, and the silence was oppressive, only broken by the gentle murmur of the medical staff and the newborn's cries. The operating room was tense and quiet, and when the second baby was carefully lifted by the medical staff, Stephan felt as though time was stopping. 2 more infants were still to be born. His heart continued to sink as the second newborn's sobs filled the room, mimicking the first's, further compounding his surprise and disbelief at the first child's sudden presence. Stephan's eyes locked on a different infant, whose complexion was distinctly black. The image solidified a terrifying notion in his mind, and his anguish turned into rage. Stacy was still feeling the effects of the anesthesia and the physical strain of the surgery, so she was barely conscious. Her senses were dull, and her mind was cloudy, but she could feel the tension in the room and the shifts in it. But Stephan's response seemed twisted to her. With weakness, she begged, "What's wrong? Please talk to me." Among the sterile clinks and shuffles of the operating room, her voice was barely audible. Stacy was confused and still trying to process what was happening when Stephan turned to her, his face contorted with a mixture of pain and betrayal. "How could you?" He spat out, his voice trembling with anger and hurt. "Who? Why?" His questions sliced through the air, accusatory and sharp. The sight of the second child confirming the unexplainable reality that he was unwilling to accept broke Stephan beyond comprehension. In a fit of rage, he threw more accusations at Stacy, each word bearing the weight of his broken trust. The medical team was taken by surprise and could only watch in dismay as the personal drama played out amid the crucial procedures of childbirth. When Stephan left the operating room without waiting for an explanation, his exit was abrupt. His direction was haphazard, but it was motivated by an intense yearning to get away from the circumstance that had made him feel hopeless. The hospital hallways vanished from view as he wandered through a tumultuous state of fury, uncertainty, and sadness in the surgery room. With her head still reeling from the anesthesia and the emotional bombshell, Stacy was left in a state of turmoil. She felt a deep gnawing when Stephan dropped, unable to defend herself or fully understand the circumstances. As the reality of her circumstances hit in, panic set in and tears began to flow down her face, blending with the clean blue of the surgical drapes. The medical staff, who were trained to handle medical emergencies, found themselves navigating the difficult balance of finishing the delivery while providing Stacy with whatever comfort they could. The atmosphere was heavy with a mix of clinical detachment and human concern, and the operating room remained a whirlwind of activity as the medical team focused on delivering the third baby amid the chaos of emotions and medical procedures. The situation was as confusing to her as it was to Stephan. After the procedure, the doctors quickly moved Stacy to a recovery room, ensuring her physical well-being while being acutely aware of her emotional fragility. Meanwhile, the hospital staff realized the gravity of the situation and Stacy's need for support and contacted her mother. The final cries of the newborn echoed those of the first two. Another child with black skin was brought into the world. The consistency in the appearance of all three babies only deepened the mystery and Stacy's distress. After getting the phone, Kate hurried to the hospital, her mind racing with concerns at the abrupt request and the vague information given. When Kate got there, she discovered Stacy awake, her eyes wide with astonishment and bewilderment. Her daughter's heartbreaking plight was witnessed by her as she hurriedly approached and clasped Stacy's hand, her presence a silent pillar of strength. "Stacy, honey, I was called by the hospital, but they didn't say anything on the phone," Kate inquired politely in an attempt to close the comprehension gap. With tears welling up in her eyes, Stacy gazed at her mother. "Mother, I don't understand anything about this." She stumbled over her words, swaying the black-skinned kids. Kate listened in stunned silence, her mind racing to piece together the details. Her heart ached for Stacy, seeing her so vulnerable. Confused Stacy, "We'll figure this out together. You're not alone," she reassured her daughter, holding her hand as Stacy lay there, the weight of her situation starting to fully sink in. "Stephan left, so angry that he just left me here alone." She remembered the talk she had with the woman in the clinic as dawn arrived. The woman who had been dumped by her spouse, Stacy, recalled how Stephan had comforted her at the time, saying he would never leave her side. However, now she had to face the difficult prospect of parenting 3 children by herself, a circumstance she had never thought she would find herself in. "I never imagined that, despite Stephan's assurance that he would always be here, I would accomplish this with him." The irony of Stacy's predicament was not lost on her. Once a consoling bystander to another woman's terror, she was now a direct participant in a comparable nightmare. Stacy muttered, her voice filled with treachery and misery. Morning light crept softly through the hospital room window, casting a gentle glow that bided the turmoil of the previous day. Stacy felt a slight improvement from the surgery and was starting to grapple mentally with the reality of her new circumstances. Kate stayed by Stacy's side, offering the comfort of her presence and the assurance of her unwavering support. Together, they would now navigate this bewildering path. The peaceful contemplation of her mother, Kate, who had remained by her side the entire night, providing the kind of quiet strength that only a mother can offer, was suddenly disturbed by a disturbance at the hospital entrance. The sounds were faint at first, but they soon became audible cries of rage. Kate jumped up suddenly and moved to the door to see outside, her senses telling her that it was Stephan. His gestures were irregular as he removed luggage and bags from the car that Stacy recognized as her own. And in between his yells, his voice, which had once been familiar and reassuring, held a harsh edge of fury that sliced through the morning's serenity. Hospital security swiftly intervened, approaching Stephan with a calm firmness. But he resisted, his anger seeming to feed on itself. The security guards had to physically restrain him, in a struggle that drew the attention of patients and staff alike back in the room, as Stephan hurled accusations and ordered Stacy to find the real father of those babies. "Because you're not coming back home," the hospital staff, unprepared for such a scene, scrambled. The last fragments of her existence with Stephan fell apart in front of everyone, causing hot, uncontrollable tears to fall down her face. "It's going to be okay," her mother hurried back to her side and put her arms around Stacy in a protective embrace. "I'm here, Stacy. You're not alone." Against the mayhem that was breaking out right outside their makeshift sanctuary, Kate whispered, her voice down. But Stacy could hardly hear her above the ringing in her ears, the sound of her own universe breaking apart eventually. Stephan's outburst was contained when hospital security was able to take him away. His cries resounding through the corridor even after he had vanished from view. There was a noticeable tension in the air following the incident, and observers were both sympathetic and curious. In the middle of her anguish, Stacy's mother's pledge of assistance became a lifeline as she clutched to her, drained and distraught. Despite her own doubts about the harsh and abrupt charge made against her daughter, Kate constantly comforted Stacy, saying, "We'll figure this out, Stacy. There's an explanation, and we'll find it right now. You need to focus on healing and these gorgeous babies." Days were long and full of the constant demands of caring for newborn triplets. But every quiet moment, Stacy found her mind looping back to the mystery surrounding her children's birth in her mother's home, a place of warmth and stability. Weeks after the turbulent events at the hospital, Stacy found herself in a new, unexpected chapter of her life, now living with her mother, Kate. She was slowly learning to navigate the realities of motherhood under circumstances she had never imagined. In the meantime, Stephan remained alone in the house he had once shared with Stacy, surrounded by things that seemed to be unrelated to him. Stacy tried to piece together her fragmented thoughts, and the question of the triplet skin color haunted her. Given the certainty of her fidelity and the assumed genetics of her relationship with Stephan, she knew she needed answers, not just for her own peace of mind, but for the future of her children. The shock and resentment that had replaced the silence of her absence had somewhat gone. Now, it would come with a profound, all-encompassing melancholy. He found himself thinking back on their whole relationship, from the happy times of their youth in high school to the plans they had set for the future, each memory causing a searing pain. Sitting alone in the dim light of the living room, Stephan replayed their years together in an attempt to piece together where things might have gone wrong. He recalled their love for one another and how they had supported one another through every trial up until this point. The pain was unbearable, and he frequently found himself crying uncontrollably as he lamented the loss of the life they were supposed to have. He would ask the empty room aloud, his voice choked with emotion, "How could this have happened?" in an attempt to understand why this had happened. But there was no answer, just the echo of his own voice in the Kui house. Confusion added to Stephan's sadness. He loved Stacy dearly and had always tried to be a good spouse, thinking that they shared everything. The betrayal was painful not only because of the seeming infidelity, but also because it rocked his belief that he was now on his own and had to manage his life. After realizing he needed closure and needed to face the situation with anger, but with an attempt to understand the reality of what had happened. Stephan felt adrift, struggling to deal with the loss of his relationship and the life he had imagined. It was only through understanding that he could hope to move forward, whether that meant making amends with Stacy or figuring out how to coexist in this new reality for the sake of their children. After some thought, Stephan came to the realization that, while understandable, his emotional reaction had not brought him any clarity, but had instead widened the rift between him and Stacy, and possibly even between him and his kids. It was time for him to face the situation rationally and look for answers rather than placing blame with a heavy heart but an open mind. When Stephan pulled up to Kate's house, where Stacy had been staying, his pulse beat with a mix of hope and dread. Breathing deeply, he approached the door and pressed the bell, his resolve unwavering. Stacy experienced a wave of contradictory feelings when she saw Stephan. She took him into the living room, where Kate excused herself, allowing them space to chat while sitting across from one another, the air heavy with unspoken words. Anger, relief, and a hint of hope rushed through her. Stephan snapped out of his silence. "Stacy, I've been considering everything since I came here because I need to understand." Stacy nodded and met his gaze, saying, "Glad you're here." Stephan they dug into their pasts and related their common experiences, saying, "I want you to know everything. There's nothing I've hidden from you." Stacy's voice faltered as she reaffirmed her fidelity to their goals and the plans that had knitted them firmly together over the years. "I have never dated anyone else. Stephan wouldn't do that to us, both in thinking and in deed." Stephan paid attention. He could feel the familiar sincerity in Stacy's voice, and he wanted to believe that she could take away the hurt and confusion of the previous few weeks. He was aware of her integrity and character, and he felt that her words were true. But the way their children looked challenged his unwavering faith in the babies. Finally, in a confused tone, Stephan remarked, "They're ours, Stacy, but it makes no sense to me." He made a feeble gesture, his displeasure obvious. Stacy went over and took his hands in hers. "I know it doesn't make sense, but even though they are our children, we must figure out why this happened to both of them and to us." With Stacy's words weighing heavily on him, Stephan nodded slowly, as the passionate and intense talk started to focus on doable actions. As they spoke, the walls caused by misconceptions started to fall down. Stacy advised pursuing genetic counseling to look into the medical explanations that would give light on their children's genetic makeup. After their sincere conversation, Stephan's uncertainty and wrath subsided into cautious interest, and he consented to accompany Stacy for a genetic consultation in the hopes that science could provide light on their family's future. Stephan met Stacy's eyes with intense scrutiny. Slowly but surely, the same trust that had bonded them together. He inhaled deeply, amid the turmoil of the last few weeks, feeling the pressure of his past deeds and presumptions weighing down on him. With a voice full of remorse, he replied, "Stacy, I'm so sorry for how I reacted, not giving you the chance to explain or not trusting you when you needed me the most." Stacy's voice was a whisper, a witness to the struggles she had faced alone. The air cleared, and forgiveness was hesitantly offered. Her eyes were moist with a mixture of regret and relief. She clutched his hands and thanked Stephan, saying, "It's been hard, really hard, without you." Stephan and Stacy turned their focus to the urgent mystery surrounding their children's genetics. They decided that it was important to understand the biological abnormalities their family was dealing with for their own peace of mind, as well as any potential medical and social repercussions. They started by investigating every angle they could find online, while looking up cases of genetic anomalies, in an attempt to find any information that might have gone unnoticed. Stephan reached out to medical experts and even dug into their family history. He then made the decision to make an appointment with a well-known genetic counselor, in the hopes of receiving some answers. However, their search turned out to be more difficult than they had anticipated. The more students learned about the complexity and unpredictability of genetics. Through reading and talking with specialists, the more their conversations were loaded with talk about historical genetic markers, mutations in dominant and recessive genes, and complex and speculative theories. They made an effort, but they were unable to get definitive answers. A renewed partnership and shared goal of understanding their children's heritage forged a new bond between Stephan and Stacy that was different from before, but no less WR. They found comfort in their united front, in their family's resilience, even in the face of such bewildering circumstances. Each hypothesis led to more questions, and each expert consultation ended with suggestions for further testing and research. The complexity of genetic science, coupled with the rarity of their situation, left them frustrated and often more confused than when they started. Back at home, Stephan and Stacy discovered that they were in a peaceful bubble with their 3 infants. The sounds of their kids falling asleep on vibrantly colored mats filled the living room, creating a scene of domestic bliss and a picture of the family life they had always dreamed of, finally coming true despite the recent upheaval. As they unwinded together, a sense of peace allowed them to truly appreciate what they had. The complexity of their situation had not vanished, but for a brief period of time, they were able to put aside their quest for answers and simply be a family in the peaceful domesticity of their surroundings. They had 3 lovely, healthy children and a renewed strength in their relationship. As Stephan watched Stacy gently adjust a blanket around the sleeping triplets, his mind drifted back to the numerous conversations and investigations they had undertaken. None of them had provided them with the clarity they sought, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the solution was simpler, possibly something they had overlooked. An idea struck him that was so obvious, yet somehow lost. In the emotional chaos of the previous weeks, Stacy reluctantly starting off so as not to interrupt the peace, Stephan was forced to ask himself, "Do you remember everything about the insemination process? I'm referring to the details of the clinic's actions." Stacy looked up, captivated by the tone of his voice, and a little perplexed by the abrupt change in topic. "Yes, partially. Why do you ask?" Stephan paused to gather his thoughts. "I've been thinking that after years of difficulty, we finally went to the clinic. It was meant to be a simple insemination using my sperm. But what if anything went wrong at the clinic, perhaps with the sample or the process itself?" That thought weighed heavy and important. When Stacy realized that Stephan had implied something that neither of them had thought of, her eyes grew wide. It made a disturbing amount of sense. You mean that there might have been a mix-up or anything else with the samples? Stacy's voice was a mixture of hope and fear. It was unsettling to consider that the clinic may have revealed so much about their children's appearance. But it was also a possible solution to the lingering mystery around it. Stephan responded with a wave of conflicting feelings. They decided to visit the clinic the following morning to make pointed inquiries and demand transparency regarding the processes and materials used during Stacy's treatment, because they thought there was a lead worth pursuing that would ultimately provide an explanation for the unexplainable. They decided to put aside their concerns and doubts and spend the evening quietly in the living room, watching over their children as they slept, each moment a building block in the life they were determined to build together, the peaceful and contented life. This new avenue of inquiry rekindled a sense of purpose and a directive that might lead to the answers they so desperately sought for the remainder of the day. The looks on their kids' faces served as a constant reminder of what matters most: their family, their togetherness, and their love. When Stacy and Stephan arrived at the insemination clinic, the sun had just begun to rise. They were filled with a mixture of excitement and fear as they set out to discover the truth about their triplets' mysterious genetic makeup, hoping that the clinic's records or procedures would hold the answer they so desperately needed. However, instead of receiving empathy or understanding, the staff treated them with a cold professionalism that almost seemed contemptuous. When they explained their situation, the staff directed them to Mrs. Harrow, the stern woman who had been overseeing the clinic's operations for years. Stacy and Stephan pleaded with Mrs. Harrow to re-examine the records in order to take into account any possible error, no matter how small, that might have occurred during the insemination process. They described their situation in detail, their voices full of emotion as they recounted the events leading up to and following the birth of their children. When they had finished, Mrs. Harrow responded in a firm, unwavering tone, saying, "I assure you our clinic adheres to the highest standards. We double-check all samples and procedures. It's simply not possible that an error occurred on our part." As Stephan's frustration grew, he pressed for clarification, saying, "Please just check the records again. It's all we ask. Something doesn't add up. And it's not just about us. There are 3 children whose future could be affected by this." Despite their passionate plea, Stacy said, "We need to understand for our babies. Please help us." Her eyes welled with tears. Mrs. Harrow's position did not alter. "I can relate to your predicament," she stated in a cold, emotionless voice, "but there is no chance of a mix-up because our controls are too strict." They felt a mixture of helplessness and fury when their request for a deeper examination into their case was categorically denied. "If you think there has been a mistake, I would advise that perhaps the error is not in our procedures, but elsewhere." With sorrowful hearts, Stacy and Stephan departed the clinic. They were left with more questions than answers as a result of the clinic's lack of cooperation, and they felt the weight of the unsolved mystery bearing down on them as they walked back to their car. Stacy leaned very close to Stephan, her eyes welling up with tears. "What do we do now?" Stephan put an arm around her, his own eyes damp as he gazed forward. With her voice breaking, Stacy muttered, "There must be another way to obtain the answers we require," Stephan firmly stated, letting out a deep breath that mixed rage and resolution. Outside the clinic, Stacy and Stephan sat in their car, their silence thick with frustration and defeat. As Stephan was about to drive away from yet another dead end, he turned the key in the ignition. They were both startled by a sudden rap on the window, and a woman with tears streaming down her face motioned desperately for them to roll down the window. Hesitantly, when Stephan obliged, the breathless woman identified herself as Cynthia, a lab worker at the clinic, and she began to cry. There in the hallway, her voice stuttering from emotion-choked speech, "I heard all you had to say to Mrs. Harrow. The words, 'the day of your insemination was very hard for me, because it was the anniversary of my son's death. He drowned in a tragic accident a year before,' came out of Cynthia's mouth as Stacy and Stephan exchanged a confused look, not knowing how to react. Her confession hung in the air, a poignant echo of their own despair. Wiping her eyes, Cynthia tried to gather herself. "I believe that was a mistake. I'm not sure what it is precisely, but ever since that day, I've felt something, and after reading your story, can't deny it anymore." With her heart racing, Stacy reached out to grasp Cynthia's trembling hand. "What do you suppose transpired?" "Cynthia, give me a few days. I need to check through the records and speak with some individuals." I'm not sure if Cynthia acknowledged that her voice was barely a whisper, "but I want to help you. I need to make things right for you and for myself. I promise." After listening carefully, Stephan finally said, "How can we trust you?" His tone was cautious, but not cruel, because, after all, they hardly had any money to spend on trust. Cynthia held his stare directly, her resolution evident in her words. "I just need to know the truth. Whether it was my fault or not," noting the sincere regret and resolve in her eyes. "I'm not asking for anything in return, and I'm risking my career by even talking to you." Stacy gently nodded. "Cynthia, we'll wait for your call." Cynthia smiled gratefully, wiped away her tears, and quickly made her way back to the clinic, disappearing inside. Stacy reclined in her chair, a flash of hope burning in her chest. Perhaps this is it. Stephan perhaps will finally learn the truth about what transpired. Stephan, for the first time in weeks, they felt that not all doors were closed to them. They had a potential ally, and with her assistance, the truth might finally come to light in the days that followed. His skepticism was tempered by the possibility of a new lead, so he simply squeezed Stacy's hand in response. "Let's hope," he said quietly, as they drove away from the clinic. Stacy and Stephan were full of possibilities and whiffs as they waited tensely for any word from Cynthia. Every day after their encounter with Mary was a challenge of endurance. But with each other's support and the tentative hope Cynthia had given them, they managed to bear the weight. The days that followed were marked by a cautious optimism that had been lacking in the weeks before. After the kids went to bed, Stacy and Stephan would talk about the possibilities of what Mary and they might discover. Their conversations would always come back to the same unanswered questions about the clinic's procedures and the integrity of the sample handling. Stacy and Stephan found themselves in a state of suspended anticipation, each day stretching longer as they awaited the call that might change their lives. They tried to maintain a routine for the sake of the triplets, whose innocent laughter and playful antics provided a much-needed diversion from the tension of uncertainty in the quiet moments. After being overcome with uncertainty and pain, Stephan directed his attention toward figuring out the specific details that may have contributed to their current predicament. Stacy, on the other hand, was experiencing conflicting feelings. She had optimism that Cynthia's inquiry would prove her innocence, but she was also very afraid of what it might reveal. One evening, as they sat together in the warm glow of the living room lamp, they discussed how serious things could be if mistakes were really discovered. This would affect not just their family, but also others who had put their faith in the clinic's confidence. Stephan snapped out of his silence. He reached for Stacy's hand and said, "No matter what happens, we've been through a lot. And this situation has tested us in ways we never imagined." Stacy gave a nod and squeezed his hand back. "Yes, it has demonstrated to us that we can overcome any obstacle as long as we work together. Although I'm afraid, I'm also hopeful that the truth will provide some serenity." They knew that the challenges ahead might put them to the test even more, but they were now united in their desire to tackle them as a team. As the week went on, their relationship, forged through the hardships of misunderstanding and the shared burden of the unknown, had grown stronger. Drew came to an end. When the long-awaited call eventually arrived, it was late in the afternoon, when the triplets' playfulness usually filled the house. Stacy picked up the phone, her heart in her throat and Stephan looming close by, reflecting her uneasiness. "Yes, it's me, Cynthia." Stacy. Her voice carried the weight of her findings. "I've done everything I could to look through the records and speak with my coworkers in private. There's something you should see. If you can come to the clinic tomorrow morning, I can show it to you then." Breathless, Stacy looked at Stephan, who was nodding and had a determined smile on his face. "We'll be there, thank you," Stacy said, her voice flat, belying her internal struggle as they hung up the phone. Stacy and Stephan drove to the clinic, their hearts pounding with a mixture of apprehension and hope. Today could bring the closure they so desperately needed, or it could open up new wounds. Either way, they were ready to face the truth, whatever it might be. The reality of the moment settled over them that night as they prepared for bed. The air was thick with unspoken fears and silent prayers for strength, leading them to a private conference room to ensure seclusion for the next talk. Cynthia maintained a solemn but unmistakably urgent manner. Once seated, she inhaled deeply and met their gazes with a mixture of regret and resolution. "Since our previous conversation, I've been reviewing our policies and records." She started out, speaking steadily, but there were signs of inner conflict, and I noticed something unsettling. Not only a typing error, but also an error that happened because I wasn't feeling well that day. Stacy and Stephan were staring at Cynthia, and the atmosphere felt heavy with the weight of revelations that were about to happen. That day, my son's death anniversary, I was so upset that I shouldn't have been working and mixed up the samples. Mary Ann acknowledged that her voice was a little bit broken throughout the insemination process. I apologized profusely for my error and accepted full responsibility for the results. It felt like the air surrounding them became thicker. As the shock of Cynthia's confession spread over the room, Stephan and Stacy exchanged glances. A tacit expression of shock and compassion. "You claim that the children are not genetically mine." Yet Stephan discovered his voice first. Instead of being accusing, his tone was one of sad inquiry. Cynthia nodded, regretful eyes shining. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. I am so sorry that this mistake has altered your life. And I'm here to support you in any way I can to make it right." With a mixture of comfort and dismay, Stacy extended her hand across the table in a gesture of forgiveness. "Mary, thank you for letting us know that we had been in the dark for so long." Cynthia went on to provide the information she had acquired, including lab data and documentation discrepancies that verified the confusion. "If you choose to file a lawsuit against the clinic, I have everything you might need ready. If you just need it for peace of mind, I'm ready to completely support your cause." The topic of next legal measures was brought up, but more pressing. Worries about how to tell their families about this and cope with the reality of their circumstances also came up. As they were leaving the clinic, Mary assured them of her continued collaboration and help in handling the fallout from her mistake. As they drove away from the clinic, the weight of the world felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because they realized how deeply a single moment of human frailty could impact lives, and heavier because the truth had finally come to light, liberating them from the shackles of ambiguity. The burden of Cynthia's revelations hung over the vehicle like a quiet third presence. At last, the silence was broken by Stephan, whose mind was a tornado of feelings. Cynthia made a serious mistake, but based on her current behavior and her regret, I think Stacy genuinely regrets what transpired. Stacy nodded, echoing his thoughts. "Yes, I saw it too. It's not just about owning up to the mistake. Cynthia has done that. I've been reflecting on what it means to be a father. These children are my children, even though they are not genetically mine. That doesn't change how I feel about them, though. I am their father, and I will continue to be the best father I can be." Jonah let out a long, deep breath that seemed to release some of the tension he had been carrying. Their conversation turned to Cynthia. Despite the turmoil her mistake had caused, her willingness to come forward and her efforts to make amends spoke volumes about her character. She could have stayed silent behind the clinic's policies, but she chose to tell the truth. Stacy reflected. "Yes, and that takes courage." Her heart was swelling with love and respect for the man beside her. "I knew you would say that," she said softly. "That's just one of the many reasons why I love you." Stephan concurred that although forgiving her doesn't erase the hurt and confusion, it is a step in the right direction for everyone's recovery via the spirit of forgiveness. When the triplets' first birthday approached in Ring Mary and was a natural choice, Stephan and Stacy made the decision to not only stay in touch with Cynthia, but also to include her in their lives. They saw the void left by the loss of her son, and how their children brought a light to her eyes that had been dimmed by grief. The celebration was a cheerful, lively affair, with family and friends gathered to mark the milestone. As the celebration progressed, Mary and she arrived carrying gifts, and with a heart full of gratitude, mixed with anxiety and excitement. Seeing Cynthia with the triplets, Stephan and Stacy could see a sincere bond grow, a connection nourished by shared trials and forgiveness. Cynthia's interactions with the children were gentle and joyous. For her part, Cynthia discovered that having them in their lives allowed her to rekindle the nurturing instincts that had been left barren after her son's death. Over time, As the sun set over a particularly warm evening, the golden light streamed from Cynthia's home each visit, bringing her closer to the family. Her presence was consoling not only to the children, but also to Stacy and Stephan, who had come to see her as both a friend and an extended family member. The triplets' laughter as they played in the garden provided a happy backdrop to the serene setting inside Stephan and Stacy's house, generating a serene glow that surrounded the family. Sitting around the kitchen table with the cup of tea in hand, Stacy and Cynthia, with a heart full of contemplation, Stephan turned to face his family. Their voyage had been filled with unanticipated obstacles and introspective reflection, but it had also taken them to a place of profound understanding and unanimity. I've come to realize that family is about much more than just blood and genetics. It's also about the relationships we choose to form and the promises we make. Stacy grinned and held his hand. It seems like our family has grown in ways I never expected. But I am so grateful for Cynthia, who had been a quiet presence of support and love, and who looked at them both with a soft smile. She gestured toward the yard, where the triplets were now chasing each other around a tree. I couldn't agree more with these little ones. I came here today as someone who has been given a second chance to be a part of something good, not simply as a buddy or someone who made a mistake. It's strange, but as they continued to talk, thinking back on the past and making plans for the future, forgiveness and understanding emerged as themes that had strengthened them all and played a major role in the lessons they had learned. Thank you both for that gift. Mar pondered how love and forgiveness get us through all of life's unexpected turns, which bring us to experiences and people we might not have otherwise met. Stephan gave a determined nod. As the evening wore on, they made plans for future vacations, birthdays, and ordinary everyday moments that they now cherished more than ever. Each plan was a testament to their resilience and their renewed commitment to each other. Crossing his features, those moments are what define us. And we'll keep moving forward, not just for our children, but for ourselves as well. If you liked this story, be sure to subscribe to the channel and enjoy the video. And this other video here on the side will surely surprise you. Good session, and until the next video.